Hey everyone! Welcome back to another episode of AP History Help, where we tackle the ins and outs of AP US history to make sure you're ready for the big test. Today we're diving into Unit 4, covering the years 1800 to 1848. This period will be all about expansion, expanding democracy, expanding territory, expanding industries, and even expanding tensions. So grab your notes because we'll cover everything from the rise of political parties and the era of good feelings to conflicts over states' rights, landmark Supreme Court cases, and major economic shifts that transformed America. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast, where you will learn everything that you need to know about taking AP history classes, from skills to content, from historical thinking skills to themes in history. Whether you're taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP US History, or AP European History, this podcast is for you. Be sure to check out the episode list and the show notes to find the topics that you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where I am happy to answer your questions. In an attempt to cut back on how long these episodes have gotten, I know, I'm going to quickly get started. You know I have an awesome planner that will help you with your AP History class, right? Everything I recommend about being proactive, keyword active, in the course I've put in the planner, and you can find it on my website and on Amazon. As a matter of fact, since this is releasing on the week before Thanksgiving, I'll let you know exclusively that I am offering the book for half price from Black Friday through Cyber Monday. So be sure to check out my socials for more and definitely take advantage of that. Come in, students. Let's get this episode of AP History Help started. First, get your notes out. What defines the beginning and end of Unit 4 of APUSH? Well, we start with the peaceful transfer of power, and we end 1848 with another election. And it was a foreshadowing of the issues that would divide America in the period of antebellum. But let's start with the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson came into office in 1800, technically 1801, with a vision of a more agricultural America, where the federal government would have limited power. His presidency kicked off with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, doubling the size of the country and giving the U.S. control over the Mississippi River, which was crucial for trade. Even though Jefferson was a strict constitutionalist, he stretched his interpretation of the Constitution to make this deal happen, which added to his legacy, but also sparked debate about the federal and, more specifically, presidential power. Jefferson also sponsored the famous Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the new lands, mapping routes, and establishing relationships with Native American tribes. This was a massive step toward westward expansion, even though it led to complex relationships with indigenous populations. But Jefferson's time in office was not all smooth sailing. He faced international challenges, particularly with British and French interference in American trade. The Embargo Act of 1807 was his response, a ban on all American exports intended to hurt Britain and France economically. However, it backfired, and it damaged the U.S. economy instead, especially for merchants and farmers, creating widespread frustration with Jefferson's policies. Next, we have James Madison, Jefferson's hand-picked successor. Madison's presidency was dominated by tensions with Britain, especially as they continued to seize American ships and impress sailors into the British Navy. This ultimately led to the War of 1812, also known as Mr. Madison's War. It was essentially a fight for U.S. independence and honor, but it also had to do with gaining respect on the global stage. The war was costly and divisive, especially for the Federalists who opposed it. In fact, the Hartford Convention in 1814 saw New England Federalists talk about secession over their opposition to the war, which furthered tensions. Although the war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in 1815, it did lead to a surge of nationalism and ultimately the collapse of the Federalist Party. The War of 1812 also had big effects on Native American alliances. As British support for tribes against U.S. expansion waned, Native groups lost a key ally, and American expansion westward intensified. With the war over, the country entered a time known as the Era of Good Feelings under President James Monroe. It's called this because there was a brief period of national unity, partly because of the Federalist Party decline. However, it wasn't all good feelings. Sectional differences, particularly between the North and the South, continued to simmer beneath the surface. Monroe's presidency was marked by major events, such as the Missouri Compromise in 1820. This was a big one. Missouri was admitted as a slave state and Maine as a free state, keeping the balance of power between slave and free states in Congress. But the compromise also introduced the idea of limiting slavery's expansion in the Western territories, setting up future conflicts. Another key piece of legislation was the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which warned European countries against further colonization in the Americas. This positioned the U.S. as a dominant power in the Western Hemisphere, even though at the time we didn't quite have the power to back that up. Now, around this time, the market revolution started to reshape the U.S. economy. Innovations in transportation like the steamboat, the Erie Canal, and railroads connected regions and made it easier to move across long distances. In the communications sector, the telegraph allowed for faster information exchange, and the first factories were introduced, shifting work from households and small workshops to large-scale production facilities. This revolution wasn't just about technology, it was about people too. Factories needed workers, so young women and immigrants began filling those roles. However, working conditions were rough and wages were low, which eventually led to the first labor movement. The American system, proposed by Henry Clay, sought to support this economic growth through high tariffs, a strong banking system, and federal funding for infrastructure like roads and canals. But the idea of government intervention in the economy was controversial, especially in the South, which opposed tariffs that raised the cost of goods. Then came Andrew Jackson, known as the People's President. He represented a shift in American politics, advocating for the common man and expanding voting rights to more white men by lowering property requirements. This led to what we call Jacksonian Democracy, where political participation increased, but it also highlighted the exclusion of women, African Americans, and Native Americans from political rights. Jackson's presidency was filled with controversies. He faced down South Carolina in the nullification crisis over tariffs, asserting federal power. And when it came to Native American relations, Jackson infamously signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which forced Native tribes from the Southeast to relocate west of the Mississippi, leading to the tragic Trail of Tears. Another major issue was Jackson's opposition to the Second Bank of the United States. He believed it favored the wealthy elite over ordinary citizens. So he vetoed its recharter and redistributed federal funds to state banks, earning him both praise and criticism. This unit wasn't just about politics and economics, it was also about social change. The Second Great Awakening was a religious revival that inspired people to work toward a better society. This period saw the rise of movements for temperance, the abolition of slavery, and women's rights. Key leaders like William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass called for an end to slavery, while women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott advocated for gender equality. The period also saw reform in the treatment of the mentally ill, led by activists like Dorothea Dix, who campaigned for more humane care. These reform movements were largely driven by the belief that America had a duty to improve itself and live up to its democratic ideals. They reflected both the influence of religious fervor and the changing social dynamics of a country becoming more urbanized and industrialized. So, to sum it all up, Unit 4 was a time of enormous change and growth. We saw the expansion of American democracy, even if it was limited to certain groups. We watched as the market revolution and new infrastructure transformed the economy and connected different regions of the country. Political tensions over issues like the role of the federal government and slavery were rising, setting the stage for even bigger conflicts in the years to come. The social and religious reform movements of the time planted the seeds for future changes in the fight for equality and justice. Now, since we have a little more time, let's look at an LEQ from a couple of years ago. It asks you to evaluate the extent to which changes in debates over the role of the federal government contributed to the growth of political parties from 1800 to 1854. Now, here's a great thesis statement. While the acquisition of territories to expand the United States contributed to some political debate, the issue of whether the federal government should allow slavery to expand into new territories was the primary cause of political party growth from 1800 to 1854. Now, for context, remember, you have to elaborate and tie it to the prompt. But you could use the Constitution or the division between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. There are a lot of good options for evidence here too, including any number of political parties like the Whigs, the Democrats, the Era of Good Feelings, the American System, Andrew Jackson, the Missouri Compromise. And as far as using historical examples to support your argument, one could be when Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory, despite having previously argued against the Federalist ideas about expansive federal power, he showed that parties like the Democratic Republicans grew in the 1800s, even when there was some agreement about the role of the government. And a second example would be politicians from regions like New England formed the Whig Party because they opposed the efforts of Jacksonian Democrats to deny that the federal government had the power to recharter the Second Bank of the United States. Just note that is a limited example, and there are many, many other great possibilities. If there's one takeaway from this period, it's that America was moving fast toward new territory, new technologies, and new political debates that would define the nation. So as you review this unit, think about the causes and effects of these changes, how they impacted different groups, and how they contributed to the America we know today. Next episode, which will be released in 2 weeks on December 2nd, will be AP World History, Unit 5, moving into our next time period, 1750 to 1900. And we're talking about revolutions, industrial, French, American, more. And 2 weeks later, on December 16th, hopefully you'll return for a Unit 5 overview of APUSH. It's time for a civil war, its causes, events, and effects. If you haven't already done so, go get that student success planner from my website or Amazon. Head on over to my website, aphistoryhelp.com, where you will see a bunch of ways to contact me. Feel free to do so with any questions that you might have. I am here to help you. And that will do it for this episode. Don't forget to come back to Wendy for AP History Help. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.